The falcon broke from the Duke's gloved fist before he could close his fingers, and every man in the courtyard flinched as though a stone had been flung among them. She climbed in a hard spiral of grey and gold against the white July sky, slate wings beating once, twice, and then the beating stopped and she hung there on the warm air, watching the small upturned faces below. No one breathed. They had spent 11 mornings trying to bring this bird to the fist, and 11 mornings she had answered them with that same scream, a thin, splitting cry that scraped the back of the neck like a nail drawn down slate. "Let her settle," said the head falconer, low. "Don't reach for the lure. Don't move." The Duke did not move. He stood in the center of the swept gravel with his arm still raised, the empty gauntlet trembling at the wrist, his jaw set like a man holding a door against a wind. Sweat had darkened the collar of his shirt. The heat lay over the whole house that morning, thick as poured honey, and the smell of hot dust and dry box hedge and the sweetish reek of the mews hung in it without stirring. Nell Harlow saw all of this from the kitchen step, where she had no business standing, a copper pail of scald water cooling against her hip. She had only come out to fling the water on the herb bed before the cook missed her. She told herself to go in. She did not go in. The falcon screamed again and folded. It happened too fast for the men to cry out. The bird came down the sky like a thrown blade, and the falconer threw up his arm, and the Duke turned, and the undergrooms scattered, and the falcon swept past all of them, past the lure swinging on its cord, past the gauntlet that had been offered her 11 mornings running, and dropped, light as a settling leaf, onto the bare forearm of the servant girl on the kitchen step. The pail went down with a clang that rang round the whole court. Nobody noticed it. They were all looking at her. Nell stood very still. The falcon's feet had closed on her sleeve, not hard, not striking, only holding, the way a tired hand holds a railing, and the weight of the bird ran warm down her arm to the shoulder. She could feel the small, frantic engine of its heart through the feathers, where the breast pressed her wrist. She could smell it, the dry leather and pepper smell of a hunting hawk, a smell she had not let herself remember in 4 years. The bird turned its hooded head and fixed her with one round black eye, and Nell, without deciding to, let her breath go slow and even, and did not look back at it directly, but at a point past its shoulder, the way you must, the way her father had drummed into her before she was tall enough to reach the perches. "Easy," she breathed. "Easy, my beauty. No one's at you now. You there." The Duke's voice came across the gravel, flat and cold. "Do not move." "I had not thought to, Your Grace," said Nell, and could have bitten her tongue through. 40 feet away, the Duke of Hartmore lowered his arm at last. Gabriel Thorne was 28 and built like a man who had spent more of his life out of doors than a duke ought. Broad through the shoulder, so that the fine linen pulled when he moved, his dark hair pushed back off a sunburnt brow, his hands large and scarred across the knuckles from exactly this work. He crossed the court slowly, the way a man crosses ice, and the falcon's feet tightened on Nell's arm at every step, and she felt the wings half open against her side. "Stop," she said. He stopped. A duke, on his own gravel. Because a scullery girl had told him to. She saw the affront move through him, saw it in the line of his mouth, and saw him master it, because the bird mattered more to him than his pride did, and that one fact told her a great deal about him before either of them had spoken a sensible word. "She'll bait if you come on at her straight," Nell said, keeping her voice down where the bird could ride it. "Come round slow. Side on. Hands low." "Mrs. Harlow keeps the still room," said the head falconer in flat astonishment. "She is a kitchen servant, Your Grace. She has the bird on her arm." "Coombe," said the Duke, "which is more than you have managed since Lady Aurelia went away. Be quiet." He came round side on, hands low. He did exactly as she had told him, this great dark man in his ruined shirt, and the morning held its breath, and Nell stood in the middle of it, with 4 years of a buried life beating against her wrist, and a thing she had sworn never to touch again, gripping her like an old friend who had finally come home. By noon the whole house knew, which was the way of houses. By noon the story had gone down the back stairs and through the green baize door and out to the stable yard and back again, growing a feather at every telling. The wild peregrine that had near taken the falconer's eye, that had refused his grace himself for a fortnight, had flown to Nell Harlow out of the empty sky and sat on her like a tame pigeon. Some said witchery, some said luck. Mrs. Pell, the housekeeper, said neither, but she came to the still room doorway with her keys chiming at her waist and looked at Nell for a long moment over the bunched lavender drying on the sill. "You have flour to your elbow and a duke asking your name," said Mrs. Pell. "I have been 40 years in service, and I have not contrived to be asked my name once. However did you manage it?" "I didn't manage anything." Mrs. Pell. Nell did not look up from the muslin she was tying. Her hands, she was glad to see, had stopped shaking. The bird was frightened. "I stood still. That is the whole of it." The housekeeper's eye travelled over her. The dark hair coming loose of its pins, the high colour, the grey eyes that the heat had not managed to dull, the grace in the wrists even now, knotting muslin. Beauty was an inconvenient thing in a servant, it got remarked on. Nell had spent 4 years learning to fold herself small around it, to keep her chin down and her voice level and her cleverness behind her teeth, and in 1/4 of an hour on a kitchen step she had undone the lot. "The bird was frightened," Mrs. Pell repeated. "And you spoke to it like a christened soul. Where does a still-room maid come by that, I wonder?" "I grew up in the country," said Nell. "We had birds. It was not a lie. It only left out everything that mattered, which her father had always said was a worse sin than lying outright, being harder to find out." A boot scuffed in the passage, and the underfootman put his head in, eyes round as halfpennies. "Mrs. Harlow, you're wanted. His Grace, in the Mews." "Now," he said. Mrs. Pell's keys stopped chiming. "Now," the footman said again, helplessly, as though the word had grown heavier in his mouth on the way down the corridor. Nell wiped the flour from her arm with a cloth and untied her apron and tied it again, only to have something to do with her fingers. Out the high window the heat shimmered above the stable roofs. Somewhere a wood pigeon was saying its 3 soft notes over and over, and she thought, absurdly, that the falcon would have it off the chimney in one stoop, and then she thought that she must not think things like that, must not let the old knowledge come up into her face, because the old knowledge had a man's name attached to it, and a town she could not go back to, and a debt that was not yet paid. "Go on then," said Mrs. Pell, more gently than her custom, and, Nell turned at the door. "Whatever you are not telling me, and you are a girl entirely made of things you are not telling, keep it from the steward longest of all. Mr. Garrick likes a tidy account. He does not care for sums that will not add." The Mews stood apart from the house behind the old wall, in the green shade of 2 limes, and even in the dead heat of the day it was cool inside. The cool of thick stone and earth floor and water, kept in a stone trough by the door. It smelled of cedar shavings and chalky mutes, and the clean wild reek of the birds. There were 6 blocks and perches down the long wall, and 5 stood empty. On the 6th, hooded now, the rufous breast rising and falling, sat the peregrine. The Duke stood at the far end with his arms folded, and he had not changed his shirt, and the sweat had dried to salt rings on the linen. He looked at Nell when she came in. He had a way of looking, she would learn, that was not insolent, but was absolute, as though the world arranged itself for his inspection, and he was merely deciding what to make of each part of it. Most people could not bear it above a moment. Nell bore it because she had been raised among creatures that read you in a glance and forgave nothing, and a duke was easier than a goshawk. "Your name," he said. "Nell Harlow, Your Grace." "Mrs. Harlow. There is no Mr. Harlow. It is what they call the still-room woman, sir, married or no." Something flickered in his face. Not a smile. He did not look a man much practiced at it. but the place a smile might go. "How long have you been in this house?" 2 years, come Michaelmas. 2 years. He unfolded his arms and walked to the perch, slow and side on, hands low, and she saw that he had remembered, that he was a man who learned a thing once and kept it. The falcon turned her hooded head to the sound of him and did not bait. 2 years under my roof, and Coombe has half ruined his arm at this bird since the spring, and I have stood in that yard like a fool every morning since the hay was in, and you walk out with a pail of water and she comes to you off the wind." He stopped an arm's length from the block and looked not at the bird, but at Nell. "I should like you to tell me how." "I cannot tell you how, sir." She kept her eyes on the bird. "I only know that you are all of you wanting her too much. A frightened thing feels wanting like heat off a fire. It will go to the one place in the yard that isn't burning." He was quiet. Out beyond the wall the lime leaves stirred and went still. "And you were not burning," he said. "I had a pail of scald water and a cook who would have my hide. I had no thought to spare for the bird at all. That, at least, was true to the bone. She felt it. That is all. It is not witchery, and it is not a gift, whatever they are saying in the yard. It is only that I wanted nothing from her." "Everyone wants something from her," said the Duke. "She was my sister's. Lady Aurelia manned her from the nest, fed her, flew her, would have no hand near her but her own. And then my sister married, and went to her husband's people in the north, and she could not take a haggard peregrine across 3 counties, and she left her to me." He said it evenly, but Nell heard the thing under the evenness, the way you hear water under ice. "I gave my word I would fly her. I have not so much as got her to the fist. A man may keep most promises with effort. Mrs. Harlow, this is the one that has beaten me." And there it was, the loneliness of him, laid bare in a stone room in one plain speech. A man rattling about a great house with 5 empty perches and 1 bird that would not love him, keeping faith with a sister who had gone away, because the keeping of faith was the only company he had left. Nell looked at him and wished she had not heard it. It is a dangerous thing to be handed a man's solitude before breakfast. You cannot give it back. "What is her name?" she asked, to have somewhere to put her eyes. "Saba." At the sound the falcon's head came round. Nell stepped to the block, side on, hands low, and the bird leaned to her as a flower leans, and she ran 1 finger, very lightly, down the warm male of the breast, and felt the heartbeat begin to slow. "She is hungry," Nell said, and stopped, because the next words were old words, and they had come up into her mouth before she could catch them. "Her keel stands too sharp. She's being flown empty in this heat to make her keen, and it's making her wild instead. And her jesses." Her finger found the slit leather at the bird's ankle. "These are too stiff, new, and never worked soft. They've galled her. She's not refusing the fist, sir. She's telling you her feet hurt, and her belly's empty, and the man holding the lure is frightened of her. She's been telling you for a fortnight. No one was listening. The silence that came down then was a different silence than before." Nell heard her own voice still hanging in the cedar-scented air, and understood, far too late, exactly what she had done. A still-room maid did not know the set of a keelbone. A still-room maid did not know that haggards are flown empty to sharpen them, or that green Jessie's gall, or any single word of what had just walked out of her mouth in front of the master of the house. She had kept it folded down for 4 years, through the long road south, through the cold first winter, through 2 years of flower and lavender and her chin tucked low, and a grey bird off the wind had unfolded her in an afternoon. The Duke was looking at her the way a man looks at a coin that has rung wrong on the counter. "That," he said slowly, "is a very great deal for a woman who grew up where they merely had birds. She might have got away with it even then. She might have bobbed and stammered and said she'd only heard the grooms talk, that she was repeating like a parrot what she did not understand, and a man wanting to believe her would have let her. But the Duke of Hartmore was not a man wanting to believe her. He was a man who had been beaten by 1 bird for a fortnight, and had just heard the reason said plainly by a girl in a flower, dusted apron. and such a man wants the truth more than he wants anything else in the world. Where did you grow up, Mrs. Harlow? In the country, sir. That is not a place. That is a refusal. He took a step nearer, and the bird did not bait, because the bird was hers now, and could feel that she was not afraid of him, only of the question. Whose muse? Speak plainly. I am not going to turn you off for knowing the set of a keelbone. For God's sake, I have been hunting a person who knows it since Easter. I want to know who taught you. The lime leaves moved against the high window. Somewhere out in the bright day a horse stamped, and a man laughed, and the ordinary afternoon went on. The afternoon in which Nell Harlow was a still-room woman with a clean account and no history, and she stood on the edge of it and felt it ending. My father, she said. And your father was a falconer. The word came out of her rough, as though it had rusted. She had not said it aloud in 4 years. He was a falconer, sir, to a great house, as you are a great house. He kept the mews and flew the hawks and bred them and trained them, and I was his only one, and so he trained me beside the dogs and the boys, because there was no one else to do it, and because her voice caught, and she steadied it. Because I had the hands for it. He said I had the best hands he ever saw, and he was not a man given to saying kind things, so I have always supposed it was merely true. What house? I would rather not, Your Grace. What house, Mrs. Harlow? It does not signify which house. She lifted her chin, and the old steel that 2 years of flour had not rusted came up into her grey eyes, and the Duke saw it, and she watched him see it. What signifies is that I am not that man's daughter any longer. I am a still-room woman of 2 years' good character, and I should like to remain one, and I am asking you, not as my master, for I know I have no right to ask my master anything. I am asking you as the one soul who has the keeping of this, to let me remain one. Leave my father where he is. Leave that house where it is. I will tell you anything you like about the bird. I will tell you nothing at all about the girl. For a long moment she thought she had ruined herself past mending. One did not bargain with the Duke. One did not set conditions. The next words out of his mouth might be Mrs. Pell's name and a fortnight's wages and the gate. She had seen servants turned off for less than meeting a master's eye, and she had just met his, and held it, and told him no. The Duke of Hartmore looked at her, and looked at the falcon leaning warm into her hand, and something in the set of his shoulders changed. Eased, almost, as if a weight he had carried up from the yard had at last found the floor. There is a hawking party here in 3 weeks, he said abruptly. Lady Whiston and her people, from Chevely. It was arranged before a great many things. They will expect sport. They will expect, in particular, to see the Duke of Hartmore fly the famous wild peregrine that his sister could fly, and he, it is whispered, cannot. His mouth twisted. I will not be made a laughingstock in my own coverts, Mrs. Harlow, and I will not give Saba up to be sold off as useless, which is what my steward has advised these 3 mornings running, and will advise again at dinner. Those are the 2 roads in front of me, and I do not care for either. There is a third, said Nell quietly, because she could not help it, because it was already there in the room between them, warm and grey and breathing. Yes, he looked at her, level and absolute, a man laying down a stake. You will come to this mews each morning and each evening. You will get this bird to the fist and to the lure and fit to fly before company, and you will do it in 3 weeks. Kumbe will be told you assist him. The house will be told nothing else, and your 2 years of good character will go on exactly as before, your wages doubled and your past your own affair, on one condition. He paused. That you never once tell me less than the truth about the bird. The girl you may keep. The bird is mine. Out beyond the wall a bell began to ring up at the house, calling the indoor servants to their afternoon tasks. calling Nell back to the still room and the lavender and the safe small folded life she had built brick by brick with her chin tucked down. She heard it ring, and ring, and ring, and did not move toward it. "And if I cannot," she said. 3 weeks is little time, sir, and she is a haggard, and haggards are not made to a schedule. If I fail you, before Lady Whiston, before all of them, what then?" The Duke of Hartmore reached out, slow, side on, hands low, exactly as she had taught him, and laid one scarred finger against the falcon's breast beside her own, so that for half a heartbeat his hand and Nell's hand were both upon the bird, and neither of them quite looked at the other. "Then we shall both of us have failed at the one thing we could not give up," he said, "which is poor company, Mrs. Harlow, but it is more than I have had in this house in a 12-month. Be here at 5, before the heat. Bring nothing. Want nothing." The place where a smile might go appeared again, and, this time, very nearly arrived. "You appear to be uncommonly good at that." The bell stopped. In the cool and the cedar smell, the falcon turned her head from the Duke's hand to Nell's, and chose, and closed her warm feet once more upon the servant girl's wrist, as though she had been waiting all the wild summer for nothing and no one else. 5 o'clock came up grey and unhurried over the stable roofs, the only cool hour the day would give. Nell crossed the kitchen court before the scullery fires were laid, her shoes wet through with dew off the cobbles, and the air smelled of the night's last damp, wet stone, bruised mint, where her hem dragged the herb bed, the green breath of the limes beyond the wall. A blackbird was running through its whole bright catalogue from the ridge of the brewhouse. By 6 it would be too hot to sing. By 6 it would be too hot to do anything but stand in the shade and complain, and so the work had to be done now, in the soft dark before light, with the world still loose and forgiving. The Duke was there before her. She had thought she would be first. She was learning she would not often be. He stood at the open mews door in his shirt-sleeves, with a horn of trimmed meat in one hand, and he had not slept much. She could see it in the bruised look beneath his eyes, and he had shaved badly in the dark. "You came," he said. "I said I would, Your Grace. People say a great many things at 5 in the afternoon that they regret at 5 in the morning." He held out the horn. "Coombe has cut her meat. I told him to keep from the mews till I sent for him. He went off insulted, which he does beautifully. It is nearly his only accomplishment." A laugh came up in Nell's throat before she could stop it, and she turned it into a cough, and saw the place where a smile might go flicker again at the corner of his mouth, pleased with itself. She took the horn. The meat was cut wrong, too large, gobbets that would gorge the bird in 3 swallows and teach her nothing, and she said so, plainly, because she had been told to say nothing less than the truth about the bird, and it was easier to give him the truth about meat than about anything else. "Smaller," she said. "The size of your thumbnail. She must work for it. She must learn the fist is the place the food lives, and food that costs nothing teaches nothing." She drew her knife, a little still room blade, for paring wax and cutting muslin, and recut the gobbets on the stone sill, quick and exact, and felt his eyes on her hands the whole while. "You watch my hands a great deal, sir. You told me yesterday they were the best your father ever saw. I am attempting to learn what he saw. You'll not learn it watching. Hands are got by doing, over years, until you have ruined a great many things and one day stop ruining them." She set down the knife. "Now be quiet, and stand by the trough, and whatever happens do not reach for her. If she baits, let her hang. She'll right herself. A bird that learns you'll catch her never learns to keep her own feet." She went in alone. The mews held its night cool like water in a cup. Saba came off the dark wall the moment Nell's shadow crossed her, the bells on her jesses shivering, and stood high on the block, with her slate wings half spread, and her beak open in that thin warning hiss. Nell did not slow, and did not hurry. She came side on, hands low, the cut meat hidden in her closed fist, and she began to talk, not words, particularly, Only the low, even-running murmur her father had used. The sound that means nothing, and promises nothing, and asks for nothing. The sound of a person who has all the time in the world and no design upon you whatsoever. It took 40 minutes to get the bird to step to her glove. 40 minutes of standing with her arm out until the shoulder burned and the sweat ran cold down her spine, of offering the fist and the hidden meat, and waiting, while Saba leaned and refused and leaned again. The light came up grey to pearl to the first thin gold through the lime leaves. And then, between one breath and the next, the peregrine stepped, one foot, then the other, off the block and onto the glove, and bent her hooded head and took the meat from between Nell's fingers. And Nell heard, behind her, the Duke of Hartmore let out a breath he must have been holding for the better part of an hour. "Don't speak," she murmured. "Don't move. Let her eat." He did not speak. He did not move. He stood by the stone trough with the gold light coming up around him and watched a kitchen servant do, in one cool hour, the thing he had failed at since the hay was in. And the look on his face was not the look of a master being served. It was barer than that, and Nell, glancing once and once only, wished again that she had not seen it. "There," she said, when the meat was gone, and the bird stood quiet, rousing her feathers with a long satisfied shudder. "That is the whole of the secret, Your Grace. You feed her from the place you want her to love. You do it every day until she believes you. There is no other trick in the world. You make it sound a simple thing. It is a simple thing. It is only not an easy one." She turned, the falcon riding her fist as though she had ridden there all her life, and found him much nearer than she had thought, near enough that she could smell the soap on him under the salt of yesterday's heat. And she stepped back without meaning to, and the bird steadied her with a clench of warm feet. "Most simple things aren't." "No," he said, looking at her and not at the bird. "I am beginning to find that they are not." She had 3 good mornings before the steward came. He came on the 4th, while the dew was still down, a tall man, narrow, very neat, in a coat brushed to a shine that the other men's coats never achieved, with a face that would have been handsome if anything had ever been allowed to move in it. Mr. Garrick the steward had pale eyes and pale hair going early to silver at the temples, though he could not have been much past 35, and he carried a small calf-bound book under his arm, the way a curate carries a prayer book, as though it contained everything that could be relied upon in a falling world. Nell knew him by sight. Everyone below stairs knew him by sight, and kept clear of him, the way you keep clear of a draught you cannot find the source of. He stopped in the mew's doorway and looked at the scene within, the Duke seated on the upturned cask, where Nell had set him to hold the lure cord, the servant girl on her feet with the famous peregrine roused and easy on her glove, and he did not say good morning. "Your Grace, I was told I should find you here. I confess I did not credit it, at such an hour. You found me, Garrick. What is it, the matter we discussed Tuesday, and Wednesday, and, I think, Monday before that?" The pale eyes moved to Nell, unhurried, taking in the doubled-wage girl from her wet shoes to her loosening hair, and there was nothing in the look at all, which was worse than insolence would have been. "I have the figures you asked me to draw up. On the bird, I would not press. Only the quarter accounts go up to your man of business on Lady Day, and I should not like to send them with a query standing open in them. There is no query. Saba is not for sale. I told you so on Monday and Tuesday, and very plainly on Wednesday. You did." Garrick opened the little book, not because he needed it. Nell understood at once that he never needed it, that the book was a kind of theatre, and laid one pale finger on a page. The figure offered for her by Sir John Bale stands at 60 guineas. 60 guineas, Your Grace, for a haggard that has not made a kill all summer, and has half ruined Coombe's arm, against which we set her keep, Coombe's wages, the meat, the loss of the muse to any useful purpose, and now, I am given to understand, the doubled wage of a still-room woman, who is no longer in the still room. The finger did not move. "I am a steward, sir. It is my whole function to make the columns meet. This one will not meet. I am attempting to discover where the missing figure has gone, and I find it has gone onto the arm of a kitchen maid." The muse went very quiet. Even Saba felt it. Her feathers tightened, and she shifted her feet, and Nell turned her shoulder by an inch to put her own body between the bird and the cold, pale voice in the door. The Duke rose from the cask. "You will mind how you speak of her, Garrick. Of the bird. Your Grace? You know I do not mean the bird." For a moment the two men looked at one another across the cedar smelling dark, and Nell watched something pass between them that had been passing. She understood, for a long while before she came, some old quarrel of the great house, the master who would not be managed, and the servant who must manage him or fail at the only thing he knew how to do. Garrick closed his book. "I speak as your accounts require me to speak," he said, "since no one else in this house will. You gave your sister your word to fly the bird. You did not give her your word to ruin the half-year's economy doing it, nor to elevate a servant out of her place on the strength of a parlor trick with a hungry hawk." He inclined his head, a bow with no yielding in it whatsoever. 3 weeks, sir. Lady Whitstone comes in 3 weeks, and the county comes with her. If the bird flies, I shall enter 60 guineas declined, and a wager handsomely won, and own myself mistaken with pleasure. If she does not, the pale eyes touched Nell again. Once, if she does not, I shall enter it, as I have entered every other fancy that did not answer, and I shall expect a free hand in the entering. Good morning, your Grace. Mrs. Harlow. He was gone into the brightening yard before either of them had moved. He is not wrong, Nell said, after a while, to give the silence somewhere to break. He is never wrong. It is the most exhausting thing about him. The Duke had not sat down again. He stood looking at the doorway where the steward had been, as though the cold of him still hung there. Garrick kept this house standing while I was a boy, and my father was, while my father lived elsewhere, in his own fashion. There is not a sum he cannot make meet, and he has made them meet for 30 years, and I owe him more than I can comfortably bear, which is precisely why I cannot be governed by him. A man must keep one thing back from the person who has the rest of his ledger. He looked at her. Saba is the thing I am keeping back. And me, said Nell, before she could weigh it. I am in his book now too, sir, a figure that will not meet. He will not let that stand. No. The Duke's jaw set in the way she had seen in the courtyard, the door held against the wind. He will not. He crossed to her and to the bird, side on, hands low, and Saba let him come within arm's reach now, without baiting, which 3 days ago she would not have done, and Nell saw him notice it, saw the small fierce gladness of it move through him, and saw him put it away, because the steward's voice was still in the room. He will write letters, the Duke said quietly. That is how Garrick fights. Not with shouting. With letters and inquiries and figures drawn up neat. By the week's end he will have written to know exactly who Nell Harlow is and where she came from, because a sum he cannot trace is a sum he cannot abide, and he will turn over every stone between here and wherever you will not name until he finds the figure that makes you balance. He paused. I tell you so that you may decide what you wish to do. I gave you my word the girl was your own. I keep my word. But I cannot stop Garrick from writing letters, Mrs. Harlow. I can only refuse to read what comes back. Whether that is protection enough is for you to judge, since you alone know what there is to find. The blackbird had stopped singing. The heat was coming. Out in the yard a bucket clanked, and a boy's voice called, and the ordinary day began to pour itself into all the spaces the cool dark had held. And Nell stood with the falcon warm on her wrist, and felt the old country reaching out its hand for her across 2 years and 100 miles of road she had walked away on, mostly by night. There is a thing to find, she said. I'll not lie to you and say there isn't. But it is not what he'll think he's found, sir, and that is the danger of letters. They bring back a shape, and the shape is never the thing. He'll write to the wrong house first. There were 3 I might have come from, and only 1 is mine, and he'll get back a story that fits the figure he wants and stop looking, satisfied. A wrong answer that balances is worse than no answer at all to a man like that. She drew breath. My father is well, I'll say that much, because you looked as though you feared otherwise when you spoke of yours. He is well, and he is in service still, and I left him of my own choosing, and not because I had done wrong. I want you to know that one thing, whatever the letters say. I did not run from a wrong I had done. I ran from a wrong that was done to me, and there is a man who would be very glad to learn where I have got to, and Mr. Garrick is about to put it in writing for him. The Duke had gone quite still. A man, he said. A debt, sir, is all I'll call it. A debt I would not pay in the coin it was asked in, and so I am held to owe it yet. She lifted her chin. You said the girl was mine to keep. I am keeping her. But I'll not have you think, when the letters come and the shape comes back wrong, that I deceived you for sport. I told you I'd give you the bird entire, and the girl not at all. I am giving you 1 corner of the girl now, only so the rest does not come at you sideways from a stranger's hand. Take it for what it is. For a long moment he said nothing, and the heat thickened in the doorway, and somewhere the wood pigeon began again on the chimney, 3 soft notes over and over. I take it, the Duke of Hartmore said at last, for a great deal more than a corner. And then, because the air had grown too heavy to hold, and because she had taught him, perhaps, that a kindness comes easier sideways, I will tell Garrick the figure has balanced, and the bird has consented to be flown by a person of no consequence, whom she alone esteems. He will find that more probable than the truth. Saba has always had execrable taste in company. It startled the laugh clean out of her this time, before she could catch it. A real one, low and surprised, the first she had spent in that house in longer than she could account. The Duke looked extraordinarily pleased with himself, like a boy who has made his stern tutor smile by accident, and the falcon turned her hooded head between them, as if to ask what the joke could possibly be, and for the space of 1 breath, the 3 of them stood in the gold morning light entirely outside the reach of letters and stewards and debts owed in the wrong coin. Then the breath ended, the way they do. The letters Mr. Garrick wrote. He wrote quickly, and the answer that came back came quicker than even the Duke had feared. But it did not come to the steward. It came to Nell. She found it on the 9th evening, when she went up to her cot under the eaves with her candle, the heat of the day still standing trapped beneath the lead roof, so that the little room was an oven, and her shift clung to her before she had climbed the last stair. The square of paper lay on her pillow where someone had set it, folded small, sealed with a blob of common wax, and no crest. Her name on the front in a hand she had hoped never to see again. A fine, sloping, gentleman's hand. The loops a little too elegant. A hand that had once written her verses she had been fool enough at 17 to keep. Her candle flame stood straight up in the airless dark. Below her the house creaked and settled. She held the letter a long time before she broke it, because she knew, the way you know a storm by the color of the light before ever the first drop falls, that whatever sat folded inside it had found her 2 years too soon, in the one place she had let herself begin, at last, to feel she might be safe. The wax gave under her thumb with a small dry crack. Out across the dark coverts, faint and thin and high, a falcon's bells shivered once on the warm night air, and were still. My dear Nell, it began, and the endearment in that hand went down her spine, like cold water poured from the nape. You will wonder how I come to know where you are. You ought rather to wonder how you imagined I would not. A man in my father's position has only to ask, and stewards, my dear, are wonderfully forthcoming creatures when the question comes stamped with the right name. She read it standing, because the cot was too low, and she did not trust her knees. The candle stood straight in the airless dark, and threw her own shadow huge and wavering up the slope of the lead roof, and the heat pressed down on her shoulders like a hand, and she read on. 2 years, Nell. 2 years you have hidden yourself among the flower bins of a man who does not know your name, and I have not had so much as a syllable of apology for the manner of your leaving. You will say you owed me none. You always did have a fine sense of what you owed and to whom, your father's failing. Exactly. That pride that mistakes itself for honesty. He has it yet. He keeps my father's muse still, as he has kept it these 30 years, on my father's sufferance and at my father's word, and my father, as you will recall, takes his word very largely from me. There it was. She had known it would be there. She had felt the shape of it under the loops of the elegant hand before she ever broke the wax. The threat did not come at you straight in Stephen Lacey's letters. It came round, side on, hands low, the way you bring a bird that frightens easily, and the thing it frightened was not herself. I should be sorry to see an old man turned out of the only place he has ever known, at his age, in a hard season, for no fault but the obstinacy of a daughter who fancied herself too good for an honest offer. I should be very sorry. It need not happen. You have only to come home and let us be sensible, you and I, as we were once nearly sensible together. I shall be at Chevely within the fortnight. Lady Whitstone is my mother's particular friend, and has been good enough to ask me for the hawking. How small the world contrives to be. Send me a line there, by your own hand, and we shall arrange it quietly, and no one at your Duke's house need ever learn what the still-room woman was before she learned to candy violets. I remain, as I have always been, and you have never let me be. Entirely yours, S.L. Nell stood in the oven of the little room with the paper hanging from her fingers and her own pulse loud in her ears, and below her the great house creaked and shifted in the heat, and somewhere far off a board settled like a sigh. I shall be at Chevely within the fortnight. Chevely, where Lady Whitstone got up her hawking party. The same party. The same 3 weeks the Duke had bargained her into. The man who had hounded her south 2 years ago by candlelight was going to ride into the very coverts where she had promised to fly a Duke's falcon before the county, and he had arranged it so, and he was telling her so, sweetly. The way you tell a child the medicine is already in the cup and there is no use crying. She did not weep. The heat had wrung that out of her on the road south long ago, and never quite given it back. She folded the letter along its old creases until it was small and hard in her palm, and she pinched the candle dark with wet fingers, and she lay down on top of the coverlet in her clinging shift and stared up at the black slope of the roof where the day's heat still lived, and listened to her own heart knock, and thought, with a clear cold part of her mind that had got her out of Ashcombe alive, he has named the day to me to watch me run. That is the whole pleasure of it for him. He wants to see which road I take. Out across the dark coverts a fox barked once, and was answered, and the warm night closed over the sound. By morning she had not slept, and the bird knew it before the Duke did. Saba came off the block willing enough at 5, but she would not settle on the glove. She roused and roused again, gripped too hard, turned her hooded head this way, and that as though the close cedar-smelling dark had grown a draught she could not place. A bird rides what you bring her. Nell knew it, and could not mend it, because what she had brought into the mews that morning was a letter folded small under her stays, where it lay against her like a coal, and Saba felt the heat of it through every still place Nell had ever learned to make. "She's off this morning," said the Duke from the cask. He had a cut of meat ready, and the lure cord looped in his scarred hand, exactly as she had taught him, and he was watching the bird with the new keen attention of a man who had begun, in 9 mornings, to love the thing he had despaired of. "Is it the heat coming early?" "It is not the heat. Then it is the falconer." He said it lightly. He had got, in 9 mornings, a way of saying things lightly that she had not expected of him. The place where a smile might go grown bolder, almost a smile outright now in the grey hour before the house woke. "You look as though you have spent the night arguing with someone and lost, Mrs. Harlow." Which I should not have thought possible. "Did Coombe try the door?" "He has been sulking like a wet week since I shut him out of his own mews." "I slept badly." "The roof holds the heat." She drew breath and tried to fold herself small around the coal under her stays. The old trick, chin down, voice level, cleverness behind her teeth. She'll come right if you'll be quiet and let me work. He was quiet. That was the worst of him, she was learning. That he did as she asked at once, with no sulk and no price, and so left her nothing to push against, nothing to be cross with, only the long even silence of a man waiting to be told what would help. She got the bird to the meat at last, but it took twice as long as the morning before, and when Saba bent at last to feed, Nell's hand was trembling so that the bird checked and looked at it, one round black eye on the unsteady glove, before she deigned to eat. "There," Nell said, when it was done. Her voice came out wrong. "You see, there is no trick in it." Mrs. Harlow, the Duke had risen from the cask without her hearing him. He stood an arm's length off, side on, hands low, for her now, she understood. Not for the bird. He had learned the manner on the falcon and turned it, without seeming to know he did, upon the woman. "You told me I was to hear nothing less than the truth about the bird. The bird is unquiet this morning, because you are unquiet. That is a truth about the bird. I am owed it." The cleverness behind her teeth nearly held. It would have held against a master who commanded her. It could not hold against a man who reasoned with her in her own coin, gently, at 5 in the morning, in the one room in the world she had let herself feel safe. "The letters came back, sir," she said. "You said Mr. Garrick would write letters. One has been answered. Not to him." She put the falcon back to the block with hands she could not quite govern, and turned and did not soften it, because softening it would have cost her the last of her steadiness. "It was answered to me. It came to my pillow last night, folded small, in a hand I hoped never to see again, and it is named the day it means to come for me. And the day is the day of your hawking party, your grace, and the place it will come from is Chevley." The grey light lay flat in the doorway. Somewhere the first blackbird tried its voice, and thought better of it. "Chevley," the Duke said. "Lady Whitstone's people. He is one of them, or near enough one of them, that her door stands open to him. He has arranged to be in your coverts in a fortnight, and he has written to tell me so, that I might have the pleasure of dreading it." Her chin came up. "So that is your truth about the bird, sir. She is unquiet, because I am unquiet, and I am unquiet, because the wrong that was done to me 2 years ago has bought itself a seat at your sport, and there is no still place left in me this morning for her to ride." The Duke of Hartmore stood very still in the doorway, with the dawn coming up cold behind him, and for a moment the only sound in the mews was the small dry rustle of Saba, rousing her feathers, settling, the bells whispering once and going quiet, and then he said, in a voice gone low and even and entirely without lightness, "Tell me his name." "No, sir. Mrs. Harlow. I gave you one corner of the girl. I'll not give you the rest because you've gone white about the mouth and want a name to be angry at." She heard the steel come up in her own voice and could not stop it, and did not, in the end, much want to. "A name in your mouth this morning is a name on Garrick's page by noon, and a quarrel between 2 great houses by Lady Day, and at the bottom of it an old man in a far country loses the only place he has ever had, because that is what the name has promised to do, if I am not biddable. Do you understand me now? It is not myself he holds. He has never once held myself. He holds my father, and my father does not even know that he is held." A muscle moved in the Duke's jaw, the door braced against the wind, and she watched him take the anger he could not spend and put it somewhere, the way she had watched him master his pride in the courtyard 9 mornings ago over the affront of being told to stop. It told her, again, a great deal about him. It did not comfort her in the least. "Then he means you to run," the Duke said at last, slowly, working it as he worked everything, like a man building a wall he cannot see the end of. "He has given you the date and the place precisely so that you will not be here on it. He would rather you fled the field than stood on it." Why? It was so exactly the cold, clear thing she had thought in the dark that she stared at him. "Because the running is the having," she said. "If I run, he has proved I will always run. If I stay—" She stopped. "If you stay," the Duke said, "he must do the thing he threatens, out in the open, where it can be looked at. And men of that stamp do not care to be looked at while they do it." He held her eyes, level, absolute, a man laying down a stake on a table he was not sure would bear it. "I begin to think, Mrs. Harlow, that the most dangerous thing you could possibly do to this person is decline to be afraid of him in my coverts." The blackbird found its voice at last and let it go, bright and careless, off the brewhouse ridge, into a heat that had not yet learned to be cruel. She found the steward an hour after the house woke, and she found him alone, and she had not meant to. She had been sent up from the kitchen with the still-room book, the one the housekeeper kept against the household accounts, to be entered into the great ledger before the quarter went up, and the passage to the steward's room ran past his open door, and she came on it soft in her wet shoes, meaning only to knock. Mr. Garrick had not heard her. He stood at the narrow window in the grey morning light, with his back half to the door, and his pale head bent, and in his 2 hands he held, not the calf-bound book, but a small framed thing the size of a playing card, a miniature, and his thumb was moving across the painted face of it, slow, over and over, the way you rub a worn place on a coin you have carried too long, and his neat shut face, that nothing was ever allowed to move in, had come open like a door left off the latch, and what stood in it was so plainly grief that Nell stepped back into the passage before she had decided to, and stood with her heart going, and did not knock. She waited until she heard him set the small frame down on the sill with a click. She counted to 20. Then she scuffed her shoe on the boards, loudly, and knocked. And when she came in, he was Garrick again, neat and shut and pale-eyed, the calf-bound book under his hand and nothing on the sill but the flat grey light. "The still-room book, Mr. Garrick, Mrs. Pell said it was wanted." "Set it there." He did not look up. "You are early with it." "Mrs. Pell is not in the habit of being early. I was sent, sir. That is all." She laid the book where he pointed and did not go, though every sensible part of her said go, and the unsensible part, the part her father had bred into her, that could not leave a thing unfaced once it had set its eye on it, kept her on the threshold. "Mr. Garrick, you wrote letters. About me." Now he looked up. The pale eyes settled on her with that perfect absence of insolence that was worse than any sneer, and he did not pretend not to understand her, which she had half feared and would have despised. "I wrote 1 letter," he said, "to the only house in 3 counties that breeds slate peregrines to the line of the bird on your arm, to ask whether they had lost a person who knew the handling of them. It is my function to trace figures to their source, Mrs. Harlow. A skill that walks into this house full-grown and unaccounted for is a figure without a source. I traced it." He folded his pale hands on the book. "I am told the answer was instructive. You are told. You have not had it yourself. It did not come to me." Something passed over his face, there and gone. That might in another man have been the beginning of unease. It was sent past me. Which is not how an answer to a steward's inquiry behaves, and I do not care for figures that behave irregularly, Mrs. Harlow. I asked a plain question of a falconer's master, and the answer went over my head to a kitchen pillow. Someone at Ashcombe wished it so. The name fell off his tongue flat and certain, and she felt it go through her. Ashcombe. The word she had not let cross her own lips in 2 years, said aloud at last by the one man in the house she would least have chosen to say it. "You see," Garrick went on, watching her, "I had only the breeder. I did not have the house. You have just given me the house." She had walked up a passage with a still-room book and a sleepless night, and handed Garrick the one thing his letter had not got him, written plain across her own face, and there was no calling it back. The cold, clever part of her that had got her south stood appalled at the warm, tired part that had not had the sense to keep its countenance. "Then you'll write again," she said. To Ashcombe direct now, and the answer that comes back will balance your column for you, and you'll think you found the figure, and you'll be wrong, Mr. Garrick. Because the figure you'll get is the one a certain person at Ashcombe wishes you to have, and it will be a lie shaped exactly like the truth, which is the only kind of lie a man like you can't catch. For the first time since she had known him by sight, something moved in the steward's face, and was allowed to stay there a moment before he put it away. He looked at her, really looked, the book forgotten under his hand, and when he spoke, the pale voice had lost a degree of its chill. "You are not what I supposed you," he said. "I supposed a pretty servant, who had got above herself on the strength of a hawk and a soft-hearted master. That figure I knew how to enter." He paused. "I do not yet know how to enter you. It is an uncomfortable sensation, Mrs. Harlow. I have not had it in a great many years." He drew the still-room book toward him and opened it, and was Garrick again, and did not look up. "Good morning. You will be wanted below." She went. At the turn of the passage, she looked back once, and the steward sat bent over the household book in the grey light, with his pale head down, and his thumb, she saw, she could not help but see, had strayed again to the empty sill where the small frame had stood, and rested there on the bare wood, on nothing at all. She told Mrs. Pell that evening, because she had to tell someone or come apart, and because the housekeeper had said, "Keep it from the steward longest of all," and the steward already had half of it, and there was no one else in the world. They sat in the still-room with the door shut, and the last heat of the day going out of the stone, and the smell of the place all round them, dried lavender and beeswax, and the green sap-bite of the day's bruised herbs, and under it, the faint, clean reek of the new candied peel cooling on its slate. Mrs. Pell heard the whole of it without once unfolding her hands from her apron, the keys quiet at her waist for once, and when Nell had done, she sat a long moment looking at the bunched lavender on the sill. "So," she said, "a baronet's son who would not take no for an answer at 17, and means to have his no answered yet, and holds your father over the fire to make you bring it him sweet." She nodded slowly, as a woman nods over a sum that has, unhappily, added. "I have been 40 years in service now, and I have seen that exact figure a dozen times wear a dozen coats. It is the commonest story below stairs, and the one that is never once told above. Tell me one thing, and tell me true, for I'll not help you crook it. The wrong was his, and not yours." "It was his." Mel's voice was steady now. She had spent the shaking. "I'll not pretend I was clever. I was 17, and he was 24, and the master's son, and he wrote me verses, and I kept them, God help me, and thought myself singled out. But I never gave him cause to think I never gave him the thing he says I owe. When I understood what he wanted, I said no, and he did not care for the no, and he found a way to make my father's place answer for it. There was a tiercel, a fine young hawk, the best my father had bred in 10 years, and it went missing from the mews the week after I refused him, and the word got about that my father had sold it on the sly, and there was no proving he hadn't, because the only one who could swear where it had truly gone was the man who'd taken it, and that man was the master's son." She turned the cooling peel on its slate with one finger, not seeing it. "I left so the talk would have a reason to stop. A daughter run off is a scandal that uses itself up in a fortnight. My father kept his place. That was the whole of my purpose, and I paid it gladly, and I'd pay it again. Only now the man has found me, and the price has come due a second time, and there's no leaving twice. Leave again, and he'll only follow again. He's shown me that much. He came 100 miles to show me that much." The housekeeper was quiet. Out the high window the swifts were screaming round the chimneys in the cooling air, high and thin, the sound the summer made when it began at last to let the day go. "And the Duke," said Mrs. Pell. "How much has the Duke?" "That there is a man, and a debt, and that the man comes to the hawking. Not the name, not Ashcombe, not the rest of it." Nell pressed her hands flat on the cool slate. "He wants the name. He has gone white about the mouth wanting it. And I'll not give it him, Mrs. Pell, because the moment I do he is no longer a duke flying a bird. He is a great man with a quarrel, and great men's quarrels are settled over the heads of people like my father, who pays whichever way the wind blows. I have seen it. I'll not loose it on him." Mrs. Pell rose and smoothed her apron and took up her keys so that they chimed again, the sound of the house going back to its order. At the door she stopped and looked back, and her hard old face had something in it that Nell had not seen there before. "You have managed, in the space of a fortnight, to be loved by a wild bird, valued by a duke, and reckoned an honest woman by Aloysius Garrick, who has not reckoned anyone honest since the old lord's time. That is 3 impossible things, my girl, and you did them by wanting nothing from any of them. I have watched you do it." She set her hand to the latch. "I would only have you remember that there is one creature in this house you do want something from now, whatever you tell yourself. And the wanting will show. It always shows. A frightened thing feels it like heat off a fire. You told the Duke so yourself, in the yard, where half the kitchen heard you. Mind, it does not make him wild." And she was gone, the keys chiming away down the passage into the settling dark. Nell sat on alone in the still room, while the swifts screamed and the light went amber and then grey, and did not light the candle, and tried not to know which creature the housekeeper had meant. She had half made up her mind to go. It was the only sum that added. She lay awake under the lead roof a second night, with the letter against her stays gone soft now with handling, and she turned it every way. And every way but one it came out the same, that if she stayed the man would come, and he would not come quietly, whatever his honeyed letter promised. Because a man who arranges 100-mile coincidence to watch a woman dread him does not mean to be quiet, and that if he came loud, the Duke would answer him loud. Because the Duke had gone white about the mouth at the mere shape of him, and that when 2 such men struck at one another across her head, the blow would land, as it always landed, on the smallest figure in the account, on a still-room woman of 2 years' good character, turned off, on an old falconer 100 miles north. Turned out, better to be gone before the party, better to vanish a second time, by night, with her chin down, and leave the Duke his bird half-made and his coverts quiet, and his good name unspent on a kitchen maid's old trouble. He would be angry. He would get over the anger. Saba would not come to him at first, and then, in the end, she would, because the secret was no secret now. He knew it. Feed her from the place you want her to love, every day, until she believes you. He had the whole of it. He did not need the girl. He had said so himself. The bird is mine. The girl you may keep. She rose before 4, and dressed in the dark, and took her small bundle from under the cot. She had kept it ready 2 years. The way you keep ready a thing you pray never to need. And went down the back stair in her stocking feet, with her shoes in her hand, and let herself out the scullery door into the blue hour before the dew had lifted, and crossed the kitchen court toward the gate in the old wall, and the cool damp came up off the cobbles, and the limes breathed their green breath over the wall, and somewhere in the dark mews a bird's bells shivered. Once, she stopped. She stood in the middle of the swept court with her shoes in her hand, and her bundle on her shoulder, and the blue dark all round her. And the bells did not sound again, and that was worse than if they had. She thought of Saba coming off the wall to the wrong shadow, roused, gripping too hard, turning her hooded head this way, and that for the one still place in a yard that had gone. Of a morning, suddenly all over heat. She thought of the Duke arriving at 5 with a horn of trimmed meat cut too large, and no one to tell him so. doing it wrong out of love, every morning, doing it wrong forever, because the one person who could tell him the truth about the bird had gone over the wall in the dark to save him a quarrel he had not asked to be saved from. "The bird is mine," he had said. He had not said, "and so are you." He had been careful never once to say it. And she stood in the dark and understood, with the same cold clarity that had got her south, that she did not want him to need her for the bird's sake, and that this was precisely the trouble Mrs. Pell had named, the wanting that shows. The heat a frightened thing can feel off a fire, and that she was, at this exact moment, the frightened thing. "You will find the gate barred this hour," said the Duke's voice, out of the dark by the mews. "Kumbe bars it against poachers and unbars it at 5, and it wants 5:15. I have been standing here some little while, Mrs. Harlow, watching you decide. I did not like to interrupt. It seemed a thing a person ought to be let finish." She turned. He was a darker shape against the dark wall, in his shirt sleeves, the pale blur of the meat horn in his hand, and she could not see his face, which was a mercy, because she could not have borne his face. "How long have you stood there?" "Long enough." He did not move toward her. Side on, hands low, she heard it in his voice, the held stillness of a man not reaching for a thing that frightens easily. "Long enough to see you cross the court with a bundle and your shoes in your hand, and stop, and stand a great while, and not go on. I confess I do not know yet which way the standing has come out. I should be glad to be told. I find I have a very great deal riding on it, more than I can comfortably account for, and I have spent the quarter hour discovering that I do not in the least know how to enter the figure." The dark shape of him shifted. "You will laugh. Garrick said almost the same to me of you, yesterday, that he did not know how to enter you. I told him it was the first sensible thing he had said all summer. The dew came through her stockings cold as well water. Somewhere over the wall the first bird tried the day and gave it up. I was going to spare you a quarrel," she said. "You have gone white about the mouth at the shape of him, and you are a duke, and dukes' quarrels land on falconers' daughters. I have seen it. I thought if I were gone before the party there would be nothing to quarrel over. You'd have the bird. You have the whole secret of her now. I made sure of that. You don't need the gi." Her voice failed on it. She steadied it the way she steadied her glove hand under a baiting bird. "You don't need me to fly her." "No," the Duke of Hartmore agreed, after a moment, and the plainness of it went into her like cold water. And then he said, "I have known how to fly her for 3 days. Mrs. Harlow, you taught me the whole of it by the first week's end. Feed her from the place you want her to love, every day, until she believes you. I could fly Saba before the king at Michaelmas, and never need your hand on the glove again. You gave me the bird entire, exactly as you swore you would." The dark shape came one step nearer, side on, slow. "And yet I have come down to this mews at 4:45 every morning since, and stood by the trough where you set me, and watched you do a thing I am perfectly able to do myself, and called it learning your hands, when the truth is I learned your hands a week ago, and have been coming down for the company. So you will forgive me if I do not find you don't need me to fly her the unanswerable argument you appear to think it. It is true about the bird. It is the only thing you have ever told me that was true about the bird, and false about everything else." She could not speak. The bundle dragged at her shoulder. The blue dark held them both, an arm's length apart on the swept gravel, and neither of them quite reached, and over the wall in the cool dark the falcon's bells shivered once more, and were still, as though the bird too were listening for which way the standing would come out. "Stay to the party," the Duke said, very low. "Not for the bird. I'll fly the bird myself if it comes to it, and be glad to fail at it in your sight, rather than succeed at it in your absence. Stay because the man has built his whole engine on your running, and if you stand on that field in the morning light with Saba on your fist and decline to be afraid of him, you take the one thing from him he cannot get back, which is the having of you. You told me so yourself. You are uncommonly clever about every frightened creature in the world, but the one in your own stays. The place where a smile might go came into his voice, and did not, this time, quite arrive. "Come in out of the dew, Mrs. Harlow. It wants 10 minutes of 5. The meat is cut too large. I have done it wrong again on purpose, so that you would have something to scold me for and stay long enough to do it. I find I will sink to very low tricks to keep you in a room. It is a great fault in a duke." Garrick would enter it in red. And there it was a third time, the kindness come at her sideways. Because she had taught him a kindness comes easier sideways. And Nell Harlow stood in the blue hour with her old bundle on her shoulder and her shoes in her hand and her 2 years' careful folded life come all undone, and felt the wall she had built brick by brick with her chin tucked down crack clean through, and did not know whether what came through the crack was ruin or the first thing that had not been ruin in 4 years. She set down the bundle. "The meat wants to be the size of your thumbnail," she said, and her voice was not steady at all, and she let it not be. "I have told you a dozen times. She must work for it." "I know," said the Duke of Hartmore. "I have always known. Come and show me again." They had 11 mornings then, before the company came, and they spent them. The bird made by the day. By the 4th morning Saba would come to the fist before Nell was well in the door. By the 7th she rode the glove out into the kitchen court itself, into the live noise of the waking house, and did not bait at the clatter of the scullery, or the cook's bawling, or the grooms crossing with their buckets, because the place she rode had taught her, every dawn, that nothing in this yard was burning. The Duke flew her to the lure at 30 yards, then at 60, then loosed down the long mown ride below the limes, with the morning gold coming level under the trees. And the day he first slipped her free, and she climbed and turned, and came back down the sky to the swung lure, and bound to it clean in the wet grass, he turned to Nell with such a plain, unguarded joy in his sunburnt face that she had to look away, at the bird, at the grass, at anything that was not a duke, made young again by a hawk at 5 in the morning. But the days went, the way they do, and the calendar did not care how the bird made, and on the last of those mornings Garrick came down to the mews with the calf-bound book under his arm and a single folded paper in his pale hand. And he did not, this once, open the book. "The guest list is come from Chevely, your grace," he said. "Lady Whitstone sends the names of those who will ride out, that the mews and the kitchen may be made ready. I have it here." His pale eyes did not go to Nell at all, which she had learned to fear more than when they did. "There are 14 names. I will not trouble you with 13 of them." The Duke had Saba on his fist. He did not turn from her, easing a ruffled feather with one scarred finger. "Then trouble me with the one. Sir Marcus Lacey, of Ashcombe, regrets he cannot come." Garrick's flat voice laid the words down like coins on a counter. "He sends in his place his son. The list has it, and here, only here, the pale eyes came up and found Nell's, and held them, and she understood that he had known, that he had written his second letter to Ashcombe, and got his answer, and made his column meet at last, and that this was the steward's way of telling her he had the whole of it now, name and house and history, neat and entered in his book. The list has it, Mr. Stephen Lacey, for the hawking. The falcon on the Duke's fist felt the yard go cold, and roused her wings, and the bells cried once, high and thin, into the gold morning air, and over the wall the wood pigeon began again, on the chimney, 3 soft notes, over and over, while no one in the green shade of the mews said anything at all. The day of the hawking party came up white and airless, the hottest the summer had yet contrived, the sky bleached to the colour of bone before the dew had so much as thought of lifting. By 4:30, Nell was on the mown ride below the limes in her one good gown, grey, plain. But the housekeeper had pressed a length of deep saffron ribbon into her hands the night before without a word, and she had threaded it through her hair before she could think better of it, because a girl who means to stand and not run does not creep onto a field in morning colours. The grass was already warm against her ankles. Somewhere down the covert, a yellowhammer ran its small hot stitch of song over and over, and the air smelled of crushed bracken and dust and the green sap of the cut-ride, and under it, faint and clean, the cedar and pepper reek of the bird on her fist. "You have put on a ribbon," said the Duke, coming down through the trees with the lure bag over his shoulder. He had shaved well this morning, and dressed for company, and the dark coat sat across his shoulders so that the seams strained when he moved, and he looked, she thought, almost a stranger, until he came side on and hands low to the bird out of plain habit, and was himself again. "I do not think I have seen you in a colour. It is so the county may have something to stare at that is not your grace failing at a hawk," said Nell. "I am told you set great store by not being made a laughing-stock. The place where a smile might go arrived all the way this time, a real one, brief and startled out of him. You have got insolent, Mrs. Harlow. A fortnight ago you would have bobbed. A fortnight ago I had not watched you cut a bird's meat into lumps the size of a walnut every morning out of pure invention." She lifted Saba an inch on the glove, easing a feather. "Smaller, the size of your thumbnail. I shall die saying it to you when we are both old and grey." She heard the word leave her, and did not flinch from it, the careless living word, and was glad of it. "Now stand by, and do not reach for her, whatever comes onto this field this morning. Whatever comes. Do you hear me?" "I hear you." He was quiet a moment, looking not at the bird, but at her, level and absolute in the white light. "You are certain of this?" "Standing?" "No," said Nell honestly. "I am not in the least certain. I am only more certain of it than of running, which is a poorer thing to be certain of, but it is what I have." Far down the long drive, through the heat shimmer, a horn sounded thin and bright, and was answered by the jingle of harness and the high careless laughter of people who had never in their lives feared a single morning. Her stomach turned over slow. "They are coming. Go and be a duke. I shall be a person of no consequence whom the bird alone esteems, exactly as you told Garrick. It is nearly true, and the nearly true ones are the safest." They came onto the field in a bright disorderly stream, a dozen riders and more, the ladies in habits of peacock and amber and dusty rose, the gentlemen loud and easy, grooms trotting at the stirrups, with the spare birds hooded on their cadge frames. Lady Whitstone rode at the head of them, a handsome, high-coloured woman who called the Duke Hartmore across 40 yards, as though they had quarrelled pleasantly all their lives, and the Duke went to her and made his bow, and said the things one says, and the whole gay machine of it rolled out across the warm grass, with Nell standing quiet at the edge of it, the bird on her fist, her chin level and her cleverness behind her teeth. She saw him, before he saw her. She had known she would. She had spent 2 years learning the particular set of his shoulders against any crowd. Stephen Lacey came onto the field a little apart from the rest, on a tall grey hack, and he was as beautiful as he had ever been, fair, fine-boned, the loose, elegant ease of a man to whom rooms had always opened, and the sight of him went through her cold and clean. Not with the old fear, she found, but with something harder and steadier that she had not expected and was grateful for. He was searching the field even as he laughed at something Lady Whitstone said. Searching for her, to see which road she had taken. His eyes found her, and the falcon on her fist, and stopped. She watched him understand it in stages, the servant girl he had hounded 100 miles, standing on a duke's field in a saffron ribbon with the famous wild peregrine riding her hand as easy as breath, not fled, not hidden, not biddable. She watched the smooth, handsome face work to keep its smoothness. Then he turned the grey's head and came across the grass toward her at a walk, unhurried, smiling. And the smile was the worst thing on the whole hot field, because it was so very kind. "Nell," he said, low, reining in close, looking down at her from the tall horse. "How well you look. The country air, I suppose, and honest work. They always said it would become you, did they not? A little plain employment. I find I cannot remember who said it. Perhaps it was I. Mr. Lacey." She did not curtsy. She let the bird ride her fist and kept her eyes on a point past his shoulder, the way you must with a thing that frightens easily, and it steadied her to do it. You are a long way from Ashcombe. I am wherever you are, it seems. The world is small, and I am patient. He leaned down a little and dropped his voice further into the velvet register she remembered, the one that had once written verses. Send me my line yet, Nell, and we will be quiet about all this. One word at the right ear, and a still-room woman with no history goes on candying her violets, and an old man keeps his muse, and no one need ever hear how a duke's pet falconer came by her pretty knowledge. Or, he straightened, and smiled out across the field at the bright company. Or we do it here, in front of Lady Whetstone, and the county, and your duke, and I am very much afraid, my dear, that I tell a different story. The one about your father. The tiercel he sold off the books. You will remember the tiercel. I remember the tiercel, said Nell. She said it clearly, not loud, but clear. And she felt rather than saw the Duke turn 40 feet away at the change in her voice, felt his whole attention come round like a held breath. Stephen heard it too. Something flickered behind the handsome eyes, the first uncertainty. The man who had built his engine on her running, finding the wheel turned the wrong way under his hand. Then you will be sensible, he murmured. I will be exact. Nell took one step nearer the grey horse, into the heat of it, the smell of hot horsehide and saddle leather thick around her, and she lifted her chin and let the steel 2 years of flour had not rusted come up plain into her face. You may tell it. Miss Lacey, tell all of it. Here, to Lady Whetstone and the county. Tell them a falconer at Ashcombe sold a fine young tiercel off his master's books, in secret, the spring of 2 years gone. Go on. But you will tell it standing on a field full of falconers, and the sons of falconers, who know, as I know, that a bird sold off the books leaves a hole you cannot paper. A tiercel has a ring. It has a breeding entry. It has a buyer, and a price, and a hand that wrote the bill of sale. My father kept the cleanest musebook in 3 counties. If that bird went out, it went out written somewhere, in some hand, and it was not in his. She watched the colour begin to leave the smooth face. So you had best be very sure, before all these people, whose hand it was written in, because a steward has been 3 weeks tracing exactly that figure, and a steward who cannot make a column meet does not stop. Mr. Lacey, he writes another letter. And then another. Until the column meets. You are bluffing, said Stephen Lacey, but his voice had thinned. Mrs. Harlow does not bluff, said the Duke of Hartmore. Arriving, he came up at her shoulder, unhurried, and stood, and the whole bright company had gone quiet now, and drifted in to listen the way company always drifts toward a raised voice on a still field. It is, I am given to understand, her single most inconvenient quality. Garrick. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You have been hovering at the wood's edge this half-hour with your book under your arm like a man with a sermon he is dying to give. Come and give it. Mr. Garrick came out of the green shade of the limes into the white glare, neat and pale, and entirely composed, the calf-bound book under his arm and a single folded paper in his hand, and the company parted for him without knowing why, the way crowds part for a man who looks as though he is owed money. He stopped before the grey horse and did not look at Stephen Lacey at all. He looked at Nell, and there was in the pale eyes something she had seen only once before, bent over a small frame at a window in the grey morning, a thing allowed, for once, to stay. I wrote to Ashcombe, Garrick said, to her, evenly, as you told me I would. And I had back the answer you told me I would have, that the falconer Harlow had sold a tiercel in secret, and his daughter had fled the shame of it. A tidy figure. It balanced the column to a penny. He paused. I do not care for figures that balance too readily. They are nearly always cooked. So I wrote a second letter, not to the house, but to the falconer's factor at Norwich, through whom every bird of that line is registered and sold, because a tiercel cannot change hands in this country without his ink on the page. I asked one question. Who bought the Ashcombe Tiercel in the spring of 2 years gone, and whose hand signed the bill? He turned then, at last, and looked up at Stephen Lacey on the tall grey horse, and unfolded the paper. "It runs," said Garrick, "and read it out flat and clear across the silent field. Tiercel Peregrine Ashcombe line, sold privately, 11 guineas. Purchaser declines to be named." Vendor's signature. He let the silence stand one beat. 2. Stephen Lacey. Not Harlow. Lacey. "You sold the bird yourself, Mr. Lacey, off your own father's books, with your own hand. And you let an old man wear the shame of it because his daughter had told you no. And you have spent 2 years since calling the debt of it onto her." He folded the paper once, precisely, along its crease, and held it out, to Nell, not to the Duke, laid it flat into her hand, so that her fingers closed on it. "There is your figure, Mrs. Harlow. It meets. I am sorry it took me 3 weeks and 2 letters to make it meet. I have made my whole life of making columns meet, and I made this one against you before I troubled to make it true, and that is a thing I shall have to enter against myself." His pale voice did not waver, but something in it had gone bare. "I had a daughter who knew the handling of birds. She is not living, and I have been a hard man since, and harder to a girl who reminded me of her than to anyone in this house. I ask your pardon for it. You will have it in writing if you wish. I deal best in writing." Nell looked down at the paper in her hand, at the factor's clerkly script and the one ruinous name, and then up at the steward's bare pale face, and said, very low, "I do not need it in writing, Mr. Garrick." Stephen Lacey sat his horse in the centre of a silent field, with the whole laughing county gone cold and watchful around him. And Nell saw the precise moment the engine he had built came apart in his hands, saw him reach for the smooth voice and find it gone, reach for the kind smile and find the field would not have it, reach, last of all, for the threat, and find that a man cannot hold an old falconer over a fire 100 miles off when his own name has just been read aloud as the thief. "This is a clerk's slander," he began. "I will not stand. You will not stand here, no," said the Duke of Hartmore. And now, at last, he did raise his voice, and it went across the field flat and cold as it had gone across his own gravel the morning the bird first flew. And not a soul on the grass mistook it. "You came onto my land to frighten a woman under my roof, Miss Lacey, and you have instead been good enough to hand the county your own character, which spares us all a deal of trouble. Lady Whiston." He turned to her and bowed, courteous as a knife. "I make no doubt you were imposed upon. You will not, I think, find this gentleman at your table again, and nor, when I have written to your husband this evening, will Norfolk." Back to Stephen. "Evenly, the factor's entry is copied and lodged with my man of business as of this morning. Garrick is thorough. It is his single virtue, and it is a considerable one. If one whisper against the falconer Harlow reaches me from any quarter, north or south, the original goes to your father, and then to the magistrates, and you may explain the 11 guineas to both. Now take your horse off my grass. You are upsetting my bird. It was the last that did it somehow. You are upsetting my bird. The plain contempt of it. A duke counting a thief beneath the notice of a hawk." A low sound went through the watching company that was not quite a laugh, and was worse than one. Stephen Lacey's beautiful face went the colour of tallow. He wheeled the grey hard, savaging its mouth so that it threw up its head, and put it at a canter down the long ride and away, and the heat closed over the drum of its hooves. And he was gone, and the yellowhammer that had stopped its song took it up again, small and hot and indifferent, in the bracken. Nell stood with the folded paper in one hand and the falcon on the other, and found she was shaking, not with fear now, but with the great cold backwash of 2 years let go all at once, and Saba felt it, and roused, and gripped, and turned her hooded head this way and that for the still place that had gone. "Steady," said the Duke at her shoulder, very low, side on, hands low. "For her, not the bird. Steady, now, give her something to do. Fly her, The whole reason these people came was to see her flown, and you are the only one she will fly true for, whatever I told Garrick. Fly her, Nell. Let them all see it. Then it is done. It was the first time he had ever called her by her name. She heard it land, the one word, the whole register of the thing breaking clean across at the hinge of it, and she did not look at him. Because she could not, but she lifted her free hand and slipped the falcon's hood. Saba came off the glove like a thing released from years, not 11 mornings, climbed in a hard spiral of slate and gold against the white July sky, wings beating once, twice, and then the beating stopped, and she hung there on the warm, thick air. Exactly as she had hung the morning all of this began, a small, fierce question mark over the upturned faces of the gathered county. Someone caught a breath. Nobody else made a sound. Now, murmured Nell, and swung the lure once round her head and let it drop into the cut grass, and called, not loud, the low, even running call her father had drummed into her before she was tall enough to reach the perches, and the peregrine folded. She came down the sky like a thrown blade, the way she had come the first morning, only there was no flinching in the watchers now, only wonder. And she did not swerve, and she did not scream. She stooped clean and true through 40 yards of blazing summer air and bound to the lure in the wet grass at Nell's feet with a soft, heavy thud that the whole field felt in the soles of its boots. The bells sang, the bird mantled over the lure, wings spread, fierce and satisfied, and Nell knelt to her in the grass in her grey gown and her saffron ribbon and fed her, from the closed fist, from the place she wanted the bird to love, a gobbet of meat the exact size of a man's thumbnail. The county let its breath go altogether, and then, Lady Whitstone first, clapping her gloved hands high, they were applauding, a warm, scattered patter across the hot field, applauding the wild peregrine and the duke who had tamed her, except that every soul there had just watched plainly who had tamed her, and the Duke of Hartmore, standing over the kneeling servant girl, made no move at all to take the credit, which told the sharper of them everything, and which told Nell, when she rose with the bird back on her fist and met his eyes at last, the only thing she had still been afraid to know. You called me Nell, she said, under the applause, where only he could hear. I did, said the Duke, some little time ago, by my count. I have been calling you Nell in my own head since the morning you told me to stop on my own gravel, and it seemed at last a waste to keep it there. I shall have to do it now in front of Garrick, who will enter it in red. I find I do not greatly care. The smile had arrived and stayed, and would not, she saw, be going anywhere. Come and be applauded, Mrs. Harlow. You have earned it, and I will not be robbed of watching you hate it. But he did not let her go to be applauded, not quite yet. He drew her instead a little apart, down toward the lime shade, at the field's edge, where the green cool still lived, the bird quiet now between them on her fist, and the bright company left politely at their backs, and he stood, side on, hands low, and was for a moment a man who did not know how to enter the figure in front of him at all. I had a speech, he said. I have been making it to the woods since 4 this morning. It was a very good speech. It had your father in it. I mean to write to him, and offer him my muse, my 5 empty perches, and the doubling of whatever Ashcombe pays him. Because I am a duke with 1 bird, and a great deal of room, and I should be a fool to keep a falconer's daughter, and not her father, who taught her the best hands he ever saw. That part of the speech I shall keep. But the rest of it has gone clean out of my head, because you put on a yellow ribbon, and I find I can only say the plain thing, which Garrick assures me is always the cheapest. Then say the plain thing, said Nell. Her heart was going. The bird shifted, feeling it, and she made herself still around the wanting, the old trick, and could not, this once, manage it and let it be seen. I love you, said the Duke of Hartmore. I have rattled about that house for a 12-month with 5 empty perches and 1 bird that would not love me and a sister gone north, and no company in the world but a promise I could not keep. And you walked out of my kitchen with a pail of scald water and told me to stop, and nothing in it has been empty since. I am not asking you to be grateful. You are uncommonly bad at grateful. I am asking you to stay. Not for the bird. I can fly the bird, you have made very sure of that. Stay, because I have learnt, from a hawk, and from you, that you feed a thing from the place you want it to love, every day, until it believes you. And I should like to spend a great many days teaching you to believe me. There is no other trick in the world. You told me so yourself. It is a simple thing, said Nell, and her voice was not steady at all, and she let it not be. It is only not an easy one. No, he agreed. Most simple things are not. Will you have me, Nell? A duke is poor company, I am told, and I keep low hours, and I shall cut the meat too large all my life on purpose to keep you in the room. Garrick says I am a great fault. He is writing me up even now, I have no doubt. She looked at him. The great dark man in his strained fine coat, made young again. The place where a smile might go grown at last into a whole one, waiting on her answer with the bird's own stillness, side on, hands low, wanting her and not reaching. And the wall she had built brick by brick with her chin tucked down did not so much crack now as simply come down, all at once, into the warm grass. And what came through was not ruin. I'll have you, she said. On my terms, mind, my father comes south, and Mr. Garrick teaches him your accounts, since the two of them deal best in writing, and will get on famously. And you will never again call me a person of no consequence, even to a steward, even in jest. She lifted her chin. And the meat is the size of your thumbnail, Gabriel Thorne. I shall say it to you when we are both old and grey. Say it as often as you like, said the Duke, and kissed her there in the lime shade with the falcon riding quiet on her fist between them. And the bird turned her hooded head from the one to the other as if to ask, at last, what the joke could possibly be. They were wed before the leaves turned, quietly, in the small church beyond the covert, with Mrs. Pell weeping into her keys in the front pew, and Coombe restored to grudging dignity in the second, and Aloysius Garrick standing witness, who had drawn up the settlements himself and entered against the marriage, in red, a single word: balanced. By the first frost the old falconer had come south. Nell stood at the mews door one grey October morning, and watched her father cross the kitchen court, with his bag on his shoulder, and his white head bare. 100 miles and 4 years, and a buried life walking back to her over the cobbles. And she did not run to him, because they were neither of them people who ran. She only put out her arm, side on, hands low, and he came to it. And they stood a long while in the cold cedar-scented dark, with the 5 perches filling now. A goshawk on the second block, a merlin on the third, and Saba on the first, rufous breast rising and falling, watching the two of them with one round black eye. You have got the best hands I ever saw, her father said gruffly, into her hair. I told you that when you were a child. I was not a man given to saying kind things, so you may take it was merely true. I have got a duke who cuts the meat too large, said Nell, and a steward who has taught himself to laugh, very quietly, once a quarter, and a housekeeper who saw the whole of it coming before I did. You will like them, father. They are all of them entirely made of things they will not tell you, which I am told is a worse sin than lying, being harder to find out. Out in the white-edged morning, a wood pigeon began on the chimney, 3 soft notes, over and over, and on the kitchen step, where, on the hottest morning of July, a servant girl had once set down a copper pail, with a clang that rang round the whole court. The Duke of Hartmore stood now in his shirt-sleeves, with a horn of trimmed meat in his hand, cut, every gobbet of it, exactly the size of his own thumbnail, and waited for his wife to come and tell him he had at last, after a fashion, done it right.